Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I am your host, Stephen Peinecker, and I want to welcome you to another episode. I've got a very special guest. Actually, many of you probably recognize him from his appearances on Mormon Stories. Dr. Randy Bell, welcome to the program.
Stephen, it's great to see you. Thank you.
So Randy and I have been in communication actually since shortly after the first time he, earlier this year, was on Mormon Stories. And so we've gotten to know each other. Last time I was out in Utah, you gave me a ride to my hotel, which was really nice. And I wanted just to give a little recap, because you've been on a spiritual journey. And of course, folks, this channel is kind of like the convergence of the evangelical world with the restoration and all the different conversations that happen. And Randy, maybe just tell us a little bit about your background, your faith background, and maybe a little bit about yourself, and then maybe about your story of what would lead you eventually into Christianity.
Well, sure, Steve. In a brief recap, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Orange County. My dad's the Bell side of the family goes right back to Nauvoo, and my mom's side is kind of a Hollywood family. My uncle was a director. My aunt was an actress. And my mom is the only member of the church, the Mormon church. And so I grew up, my mom was Stake-Lee Society president. Everybody likes to pop off with their callings, I guess. And my dad worked for Leo Fender with Fender guitars and Fullertons. So there's that background. And I grew up very happy in the church, a lot of big, gigantic stake dances, and the church was just bursting at the seams. Through the 70s when I, was in high school. I went on a mission to England. I knew the Mormon church was true because I was called to Birmingham, England, where Led Zeppelin's from. And so I had a good missionary experience. Came back, accidentally went to BYU. I had no intention of going, but some friends invited me to go up there, so I did. And eventually got married. Married in the LA Temple. So I'm a Southern California guy, had 4 kids. And the long and short of it is, one day as a happy member of the church, I was in my kitchen and I came across this quote that, talking about Joseph Smith and polygamy. And I had never heard that. I taught at the MTC. I had all the religion classes at BYU. I went to seminary 4 years, never heard that in my life from a official church source. Of course, I'd heard the rumors, but I thought they were just anti-Mormon lies because that's what I was told they were. And I was always just quite happy as a rank and file member. My career was taking off, though. That was another story. That was a lot of fun. But I came across the Gospel Topic Essays. I thought it was a computer hoax. I rebooted my computer, turned it on again, and when I saw irrefutably that Joseph Smith not only practiced polygamy and was marrying 14-year-old girls at the age of 37 and marrying other guys' wives while they're off on missions, the word that came in my mind quite clearly was, those are not my values. So that started a very interesting faith journey.
Wow. So basically you read the Gospel Topics essays. There, of course, is put out by the church, and you find out the history of the practice of polygamy. It was almost like this. It was like, oh, I know a lot of Mormons growing up back in the day almost thought like it was Brigham Young that started it, Joseph, but that kind of stuff. It was just kind of like these urban legends, or what people were talking about. Mm-hmm. What was it like to have that moment and discover that maybe this is not the church for me?
It was like having your whole world fall apart. Your friends or people you thought were friends, your family. I wanted to be, not always successfully, but I wanted to be a good son. I wanted to be a good guy, a good kid, and so I wanted to, please my parents, and of course with the father to son legacy that we had from Nauvoo to today, a father to son missionary service. There's a whole big family aspect to it, and to come to that abrupt irrefutable awareness that this is not what was represented to me And of course, there's been a lot of gaslighting later saying, we always taught that. Well, it's not in any general conference talk. It's not in any, not a single official church publication until 2014. This is the experience I just shared was more 2016, 2017, about 5 years ago. But it was just absolutely shocking. I can't describe it any other way.
So were you surprised when you read about the stone in the hat for the translation process?
Well, sure, because of course I was taught a very literal view, and I of course saw the pictures with the gold plates and the translation and a number of other things. I mean, when that happened, I kind of gave myself permission to go look at other things that I had been told were anti-Mormon lies. And honestly, I didn't have to look any further than the church's own church essays, because essentially they were admitting for the very first time a number of things, not just the rock and the hat, but a number of things that I had been told taught quite different narratives growing up. And so, yeah, it unraveled more and more. I was quite anxious to believe in the church. To this day, I wish it were true. I really do. But then I went to the, church apologetics, fair Mormon and so forth. That didn't make things better. So I'm not trying to be, too critical or harsh, but that's my story. And yes, it was very alarming.
One of the most fascinating things that happened to me was when I was flying back from my last trip in Utah. I'm sitting next to a co-pilot for the airline that I'm flying with. He's actually flying into work. So him and I got this conversation, and I asked him and found out he's from Idaho and he was raised LDS. And about 1.5 years ago, he read the book Saints. And just even reading the church publication Saints, he read it and says, I'm out of here. So it's very fascinating that seems to be a lot of that happening. And he's like, much of his family's left. And that's, and when I had Jeff McCullough on last week, folks, we both talked about how there's issues people leave in the evangelical world too. So it's not just an issue with the LDS church.
That's true.
So we have to acknowledge that as well. So that's fascinating. So now this is the thing. So now, okay, so you've lost the foundations of the core of your being, your beliefs and everything. So then at this point, you're probably questioning everything about God and religion and faith. I guess this took you on a journey. So you had let's just talk about that journey, about some of the books that you read, some of the people that you engaged, and where this took you, where eventually you would find your way into Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to kind of explain the landscape of what was going through my head is I had a choice between loyalty to my true believing members of my family and the church, loyalty or integrity. And I thought, one thing I'm 100% certain that everyone seems to agree on, I'm going to die one day. We're all going to die. And I believe at the time, I believed, in God, and that I would face a God and that I would have to give an accounting for life. And this is a critical juncture. Was I going to pick loyalty to an organization, or was I going to pick integrity? I chose integrity very deliberately. And I brought some visual aids, Steve, but this is the set of notebooks I've been carrying around in my car because I'm up here in Park City. Ski season just wrapped up and I'm getting ready to head back to California. But I carry a number of books with me and I'd like to share some with you. But I just went from being a lazy learner, just kind of complacent in the church, to a very active learner and compiling notes, listening to podcasts. And I kind of put together a framework. I was going to go back to my doctoral studies and study critical thinking. And then I was going to look at science, because I was really, I'm a sociologist, and while I do statistics, that's a hard science. I'm not really a natural scientist. So I wanted to look at that. I was fascinated with atheism. I had lunch once with Penn and Teller for an hour and a half and talked about atheism. At the time, I was preaching Mormonism to them. I wanted to look into evolution. I had really never studied that properly. Deism. I wanted to look into near-death experiences. I wanted to look in Hinduism, Buddhism, Muslim, Jewish, and then I want to, of course, re-examine Christianity, because in spite of my experience with the LDS Church, I always have loved Jesus. I come with a bias of just really adoring and loving Jesus. So I wanted to re-examine that. And then I wanted to look at early Christianity. So that's kind of the landscape that I kind of formulated in this whole new world I was in.
So one of the things that, of course, this is Mormon Book Reviews, and we'd like to talk about our books. And so what you wanted to do was maybe share with the audience some of the books that you engaged, and some that you really liked, some that you thought were garbage, and basically just talk about some of those books. So maybe let's just take the audience on this journey of studying and some of the books that you encountered.
Yeah. Well, I started with critical thinking, and I've got lots of books, but I'm just picking a few to kind of illustrate the point. The first book was the book I got as a doctoral student, first day of class. It's really more of a pamphlet, and it's put out by the Thinker's Guide Library. I think it's called the Critical Thinking Institute or something like that. And it's called The Miniature Guide to Critical Thinking. When you read this, you get the real essence of what critical thinking looks like. And you don't know if this person or these people are Democrats or Republicans or Jewish or atheist or Christian or anything. It's just the process to really focus on integrity and going through the proper analytical channels to come to the best solutions to our thinking process, acknowledging that we all have a bias, myself included. So there's lots of little charts and diagrams. And so I read that. And then the other two books I read was How to Think. This is by Spencer Wright. And then this is kind of, honestly, it's kind of an anti-Mormon book. And I gotta say, while parts of it I enjoyed, it was probably one of two single worst books I've ever read. Because it should be titled not How to Think, but What to Think. There's an agenda with this book, and it comes through, and it has some really silly premises where it redefines faith as faith is something where, by definition, there's insufficient evidence. And that's not the definition of faith. You look at any dictionary. So I read it twice, word for word, but it was so comical. I kind of enjoyed it in my weird way as comedy. The other one is this book, Real versus Rumor. It's written by Keith Erickson. It's a pro-Mormon book, and it's slicker, it's better written, but it's also a really bad book in terms of critical thinking. So I kind of triangulated between two good books, one for the church, one against it, and then just legitimate critical thinking.
So this is so basically what you're trying to do is you want to get all the multiple perspectives on these particular areas. And so I find that fascinating. I like that even though you had your faith crisis, you still took the time to read a faithful LDS author's book. I think that's an important thing.
Well, that's what critical thinking is. It's basically going directly to the source of opposing points of view or differing points of view, and reading and having empathy for their points of view to the extent possible. So that's from the playbook of real critical thinking.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. So you're learning how to you've set the baseline of what critical thinking is. So now you're going to then use that tool to start investigating other subjects. You had said you didn't know a lot about science, so you kind of delved into studying science. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, I started at the very basics. I subscribed to Scientific American, and I love this magazine. I had never subscribed before. And in particular, this one author, John Horgan, he was an atheist. Now he's agnostic, but he talks about the Big Bang Theory and a lot of things around this Big Bang Theory. He also wrote this book. It's called The End of Science. And this author is really wonderful because he's very honest, and he acknowledges where science has really hit walls and has done enough research to realize they just will simply never, answer certain questions. And in fact, and those who try go into ways that make, frankly, Jesus turning water into wine look like, very rational and very easy to do, because quantum mechanics gets really, really crazy, really, really fast. So I've loved this author. I could talk about him all day. Books like this, We Have No Idea, against a science book. but it's kind of a fun book with lots of illustrations on how science has just dropped the ball, pseudoscience, bad science, good science, but good science that's hit walls again. And this book, The Mystery of Life's Origins, the point being is that science, the punchline of all this is that science and quantum mechanics have come to the determination of things like quantum entanglement, where protons interact with other protons hundreds of miles away, or electrons or protons can go across the universe and back instantaneously with no time travel. Solids can go through solids. It sounds like Jesus walking through a wall is quite plausible according to science. And the word used in science now is translogical, which means it's illogical, but it's happening. It's been scientifically measured. And the more I looked into quantum mechanics and quantum physics, the more crazy it got. And so this nice, tidy notion that science is real, that maybe sixth grade science is real, but once you get into the high, big leagues of science, it's really phenomenally interesting, AKA crazy.
Fascinating. And I think it's important too, folks, is that, when we talk about, I know a lot of people who have left the LDS church often gravitate towards atheism, but I also think it's important that we recognize that the idea of the scientific method comes from the Western Christian tradition. So the very thing that is used to criticize Christians or Christianity religion was developed by the Christian worldview, which I think is important. Now, before we go on to the next subject, what I want to do is for each one of the topics we're talking about, I want you to pick one book. So in the science area, what's the one book that you would recommend that somebody read?
I would read, honestly, it wouldn't be a book, it'd be a Scientific American.
Okay.
It'd be that magazine.
Scientific American. Okay, great. And that is a fantastic. When I went through my atheist phase, I read a lot of those magazines. And Skeptic Magazine. I love Skeptic Magazine too.
Yeah, I haven't got that. There's more on my plate, and that's on my list. And on critical thinking, I would get this little handbook. It's all these books are on Amazon everywhere, but critical thinking.
So I'm going to try to provide links for quite a few of the things we're posting here. So now you go and you delve into science. So you learn that science, the more you get into it, the crazier it gets, which is fascinating. So then let's talk about where do you go? Where do you go next?
Well, before that, I just want to quickly mention, I was really shocked because I had this notion in my head that all or virtually all scientists were atheists. That's just a myth. In the last 100 years with the Nobel Peace Prize in the sciences, 65% have been Christian, about 21% have been Jewish. So the Judeo-Christian, segment of society accounts for the vast majority of the Nobel Peace Prize sciences. And another, quick little fun fact was that we talk about the Big Bang Theory, and we think of that, at least I thought of it as contradicting the Bible, and I thought of the Big Bang Theory as evidence that supported atheism. I couldn't have been more wrong. The Big Bang Theory came from Georges Lemaitre, PhD, has 2 PhDs, one from Catholic University and one from MIT in physics. And he got the idea for the Big Bang Theory from reading Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 1, and a God that pre-existed time, space, and matter. He came up with the Big Bang Theory. The science community, including Einstein himself, was dead opposed to Lemaitre. Lemaitre won out. And somehow that's morphed into this notion today that atheism, came up with the Big Bang Theory, couldn't be more wrong.
Well, and that's important because, Fred Hoyle came up with the term, the Big Bang, as a derisive name for it. And then this is the thing. A lot of scientists were reluctant to embrace the Big Bang Theory because it literally confirms the Christian idea of creation ex nihilo. And that's a Christian doctrine. And they even said, this sounds way too much like Genesis 1:1. So to me, hey, that's that in the beginning, man, we got that right.
It's so funny you say that, Stephen, because Fred Hoyle, he did disc it on the BBC. And to this day, Richard Dawkins diss a fellow atheist, Fred Hoyles. So the atheists can't even agree with themselves on the topic, but the whole topic's fascinating. When you actually read the facts surrounding the whole thing, it's very, very revealing.
It is fascinating. I think that is one of the most important advances that confirms the Christian worldview is the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, I would, there's something to that. So the next thing I did, Stephen, is I took on atheism. And honestly, it was kind of like when I went to Amazon and I got all the premier, I guess you would call them, atheist books, I was almost afraid to hit the buy button. It's like I'm doing something really evil here, but I did it. And I got Richard Dawkins, the God Delusion. And then when I was having lunch with Penn and Teller, he recommended The Blind Watchmaker, which I read. And of course, it's kind of a dichotomy where Dawkins is talking about evolution. It's either evolution or religion. And that's kind of the, frankly, false dichotomy that Richard Dawkins sets up. I bought this book, which is kind of a compilation of Hitchens and Harris, Dawkins and Dennett. And then, of course, Christopher Hitchens, God is Not Great. And then Dennett, Breaking the Spell. And then Sam Harris, Waking Up. And what struck me when the books all came in, I just thought, this is sheer arrogance. I mean, Sam Harris is telling us that we're asleep. We need to wake up, according to Sam Harris. And God is Not Great. I guess Christopher Hitchens is, but the God delusion, as if anybody who believes in God, which is 92% of the planet, is delusional. And then Breaking the Spell, like we're all under some kind of spell. So the titles themselves were profoundly arrogant. The book that I really zeroed in on was, in fact, you can see my tabs where I read this chapter at least 20 times, chapter 4, took a lot of notes. And to cut to it, because I know our time is limited, his arguments using critical thinking just evaporated. They were just really, really silly arguments. I'm happy to go into that. That would take probably another episode.
Which book was that? Show the audience.
The God Delusion.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Richard Dawkins. Yeah. So this, I had to say, and John DeLynn just had on Cara Santa Maria, who's an atheist, but she's a really bright atheist, and she really described the whole scenario really, really well towards the end of her interview. And frankly, she called these guys a-holes. And here's an atheist calling them names. The point being, if atheists are right, they really got up their game and really find new heroes to worship, because these guys, when you actually buy the books and read them critically, their arguments don't hold water.
First of all, I have to say one of my favorite writers of all time is Christopher Hitchens. I love reading him. He's a polemicist, so if you like polemics and he's a great writer. One of the more fascinating chapters in The God is Not Great was his belief of why God doesn't want people to eat pork, or the story about pork, which I find a very fascinating and compelling argument that he makes. I just thought that's an interesting chapter, just kind of an original idea.
Yeah, he's a more beautiful writer. He stays on track far better than Dawkins does, but his argument's more philosophical. But the critical thinking error he makes is he sets up a false argument between atheism and theism. And that's not the argument. The argument is between atheism and deism. And when you start to build your position, you use the ad hominem of being critical of biblical stories. That's not scientific. And it's not even an affirmative argument. And so in terms of him staying on track with affirmative arguments that are science-based and that show evidence for there simply not being a God, forget religion. Is there a God or is there not a God? That's where, if you really stay focused on that legitimate question, it doesn't cut it.
So I'd have to say that of all those books, my least favorite writer of all of them is Richard Dawkins. There's just something like nails on a chalkboard, just something about the way he writes in a very just acidic way. Not just, it doesn't come across as a very nice person, So I don't like his writing, but I would say my favorite if I had to recommend just as a good writer is Christopher Hitchens. Of those atheist books, which one do you think is the strongest one?
I would say either Hitchens or Harris.
Okay.
Sam Harris is a nicer, kinder atheist,
Mhm.
but he can get pretty dogmatic as well. The problem in my mind is dogma. People that have to be right and can't allow for a civil conversation. And when you're arrogant and name calling, we're shutting down civil conversations. And by all means, I don't want any of my comments about these books misconstrued. I have my best man's an atheist. I just had lunch with him last week, and he's one of the most wonderful human beings on the planet. So I'm not down on all atheists or anything like that. But these particular atheists who are, kind of waving the flag of atheism, they are not compelling. They're not putting forth really compelling arguments.
Like I like to say is, I know atheists that will give you the shirt off their back, and then Christians that will stab you in the back.
Yeah, and that's very true. One of my favorite quotes comes from Bill Maher, who's of course an atheist, and I really admire Bill Maher. He says, cutting to religion and Jesus, he says, Jesus as a philosopher is wonderful. There's no greater role model in my view than Jesus Christ. It's just a shame that most of the people who follow him and call themselves Christians act nothing like him. So, and I think he makes a very, very valid point.
Yeah, food for thought. I think that's important. If you're a believer, just take those words to heart. So you then said you studied science and then atheism, but then of course we need to get into the idea of like, okay, how did we get here, or how did we become humans? Like, were we made in God's image, or did we biologically evolve? So you had to learn about evolution. So tell us some of the insights that you learned about evolution and how it informs you to this day.
Yeah, well, I started putting a chart together. In fact, I started a website, and it's still being developed. And the editor on the website is actually an atheist. So we keep each other honest. It's godmatrix.org. And I have the 10 different arguments, godmatrix.org. And it's free. It's just kind of a passion project of mine. But the argument starts with ex nihilo, nothing to something. And on that one, deists make a better argument in my view. In fact, according to Scientific American, John Horgan, atheists don't really have an answer for that. Then you go to the spark of life, abiogenesis, and that, Charles Darwin presupposed life already existed. He's simply talking about the evolution of life. But in terms of going from inert chemicals to living organic, life, you have to create cells that are self-forming and self-replicating with DNA chains that are more complex than the space shuttle. So that argument, Richard Dawkins really, really runs from that argument. He gives a very brief token dismissal and kind of an ignorant dismissal to it, but that really atheists shut down on that. But as far as Darwinism, I was very interested, and what I found really immediately, because I happened to have I bought Origin of the Species, but I accidentally bought it twice. And in one version, Charles Darwin is thanking his creator, AKA God, for his journey, and the other one he's not. And it became, and so what I did, I thought, I'm going to get to the bottom of this one. So it cost a fortune, but I bought Origin of the Species printed in London during the time when Charles Darwin was alive to see what he really wrote and published. And if you go to the original version, sure enough, throughout the book, he's thanking his creator and acknowledging his creator. So this kind of was mind-blowing to me that Charles Darwin himself was at least a deist, if not a theist. I really don't know. But he certainly throughout his book acknowledged a creator. So the notion that Dawkins and others put forth that it's either evolution or creationism is a false dichotomy, because Charles Darwin himself believed in both evolution and a creator, to answer that abiogenesis question. So that was, I just kind of summarized what took me a few months to figure out, in terms of getting the books and ordering and going through them. But Charles Darwin believes it. And kind of cut into the chase, the most brilliant scientist in the world today, in my view, is both a Christian and believes in evolution. And so, and he gives very compelling reasons why. And when I was in, I don't know if I ever told you this, Stephen, but I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with Sam Young. And when we came down from Kilimanjaro, Sam went home, but I took a trip to the Rift Valley in Africa, where they actually found the Lucy skull. And I really dug in and studied, you know, as a lay scientist, I guess, or a lay person, I studied evolution. I came to the conclusion that evolution was true. I don't really have a problem with it at this point.
Interesting. So this goes to show, folks, that you don't fall for the trap that it has to be either or. So those of you who are having a faith crisis and think, well, I have to either believe in a creation account as literally as described in the Bible, or I have to become an atheist because of evolution, there is another way. And that is that there are many Christians who accept. Was it Francis Collins that you were talking about? Yeah. So here he was the head of the National Institute, the National Science Foundation, right? Yeah.
National Institutes of Health.
Oh, okay, yeah. And he was in charge of that under both the Obama administration as well as the Trump administration. He's got a very interesting story to tell. So you don't have to ditch God and embrace evolution, that you can actually have a faith and still believe in the idea of evolution. So, and let me ask you, so at this point you're studying evolution and you're studying all these things. Are you thinking that maybe evolution at the time was proving atheism?
Well, that's, yeah, when I went into this, I was coming out as a TBM, a true believing Mormon, and I had not really given much thought to this, really at all. And I thought that if evolution was true, you know, that disproved God. And that was a naive notion. And I was wrong. And you can actually believe in evolution quite comfortably and believe in God.
So this then talks about the character of God. Like, what kind of God do we have? And so that led you into maybe investigating God, or something like deism or theism, those areas. Just talk about what you were exploring about the nature of God.
Well, it was clear that God, whatever God looks like, has abilities far beyond our own. This idea that life came spontaneously from primordial soup, which is the explanation you get, just doesn't add up, because the DNA chains are billions of characters long. It's literally like dozens of Encyclopedia Britannicas dropping from the sky and just thinking it's a random accident. Because when you get into a single cell, even the most simple algae cells, the DNA in that, the structures, and the fact that they're self-forming and self-replicating, and the DNA within them is so long and so complex that it literally could hold an encyclopedia of information. And if it's not reproduced right, it will malfunction and die. That, as Francis Collins calls it, and I'm a big, I'll just come out and say, Francis Collins, I have nothing but grand admiration for. He points out just the utter complexity of it and the improbability of that just accidentally forming, as well as the fine-tuning argument. We've kind of skipped over that one too. So we got abiogenesis, we have ex nihilo, we have fine-tuning, and the explanations that the atheists are giving, they always seem to want to go back to evolution. And I'll give atheists evolution. Here you go, you got it. You know, by the way, Charles Darwin believed in God and evolution. So do I. So I'm more of a Darwinist than they are. But let's talk about the other issues, and that's where they really kind of are reluctant to engage.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting. So now you're trying to put something together where you're talking about faith and everything like that. And so your worldview, like I said, we lost everything. So you're going through this journey. What kind of God were you putting, like, that you were thinking? Well, yeah, like, because you had mentioned deism. Was deism maybe an area that you thought about following?
I was honestly, with my world crashing, I was open to atheism. When I started this journey, I was open to atheism. I was scared of it, but I was open to it. I was open to deism. I was open to Hinduism. I was really open wherever things took me. And I'm still that way to this day. If I'm wrong, let me know about a book I don't know about, and I'll read it. And if it's compelling, I'll go with it. But I didn't really have an agenda. I felt like I had not gotten the full story about where I'd spent decades of my life. And then at this point, I'm 63. I got limited time on this planet, like the rest of us. And I wanted to cut the baloney and get at factual, good information. Wow.
So tell me, where do you go? What's the next step in your journey?
Well, the next one was okay. Atheism isn't putting forth really very good arguments when you actually read them, aside from the jokes and the sarcasm. So I started reading books like The Physics of God. This is a great book because Stephen, it talks about the split light experiment, and it goes back to science. A lot of this is interwoven. A lot of these, when we talk about God and quantum mechanics, there's actually an overlap, because here with the split light accident or split light experiment, they found that they were getting different results. By the way, light was acting both as a wave and as a particle, which in the world of physics is really perplexing, to put it mildly. Even more baffling to science is that they would get different results dependent upon if the scientists were actually observing the experiment, or if they turned on the experiment and walked out the door and nobody was observing it. In other words, particles were reacting and interreacting with human consciousness. Well, there's no explanation for this other than a supernatural explanation. And of course, we get into the God of the gaps arguments, and I've been through that, and we can get into that if you like. But books like this, and then this book, Lee Strobel, The Case for the Creator, where he interviews a number of PhDs around the country. Patrick Glenn, God, the Evidence. This book, Timothy Keller, The Reason for God. This book, I Don't Have Faith to Be an Atheist. And finally, Josh McDowell and Evidence That Demands a Verdict. So the point from all this, and again, I'm greatly condensing the conversation, is that the atheists at this point in my mind, atheists have fallen flat, although they make some good arguments. I'll concede that for sure. But more likely than not, there is a higher power, there is a creative force, an intelligent creative force. And that seemed pretty apparent from looking at the science of it all.
So of all those books, tell me which ones you would recommend.
I would probably, the one that woke me up to the split light experiments and the interactions with human consciousness, that was the greatest aha moment in this pile of books, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So were those all written by Christians or evangelicals, or?
I don't know. Some of them were. Lee Strobel, of course, was an atheist that came out of Yale Law School. His wife became a Christian. He thought she was ridiculous for that, was going to set her straight, started studying science and God and so forth, ended up becoming a Christian himself. Some of the other ones, I just don't know.
Yeah.
It's more about science than
their
personal belief system.
Sure. So now you are looking at the idea of there being a God. What that's going to then take you to the journey of should my faith look like? What kind of church or religion should I investigate? So it looks like you went and investigated a lot of different Eastern as well as Western religions.
Yeah, I did. And I also, before we entirely do the science realm,
sure.
This book, I forget where who turned me on to this, but I think it's a podcast or something, but it's called The Science of Near-Death Experiences.
Okay.
And I had read this book, Life After Life, by Raymond Moody. I think Raymond Moody, Dr. Moody, really kind of broke this topic open decades ago. And then Proof of Heaven with Eben Alexander, MD. he's a neurologist, I think. Anyways, he had a near-death experience. But this book really caught my attention because what this book is, The Science of Near-Death Experiences, it's actually 12 or 13 articles published in peer-reviewed medical journals. And so we can cut through all the kind of superficial, ignorant dismissals of NDEs and really get at it from a scientific point of view. And one article was had explanations for everything to dismiss it. The other dozen articles pretty much rebutted and refuted each of those arguments, because there were in here were documented discussions. For example, a blind woman who was born blind, had never seen in her life, is on the operating table. She clinically dies for a substantial amount of time. She is resuscitated by the medical team, and she is able to describe in vivid detail everyone in the room, even those who never spoke, the equipment, who was in the next room, just such incredible descriptions of what she experienced during that NDE, that there's no plausible explanation other than she had a consciousness with sight while she was clinically dead. So that, along with a number of other experiences that have been scientifically verified and with no other explanation, leads to pretty good scientific evidence that there is something on the other side of this life.
Very interesting. I've always been very skeptical of NDEs, even as a Christian, but that other book that scientifically, those were peer-reviewed articles in that particular book. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I was skeptical. I was skeptical of all this, but I picked up the books and read them while others were just kind of dismissing them or not reading them. I said, let's get into this stuff. Let's figure this thing out.
So do you think that those are compelling enough arguments for an afterlife based on just reading those books of NDEs?
I don't know that they're proof, but there's certainly legal evidence that would make it into court. I know because I testify in court. And the question is it compelling? Is it 51% or better in terms of the explanatory value? I think they are. And I don't know that NDEs are really reconcile with the Bible per se, but at this point in my journey, I'm not really thinking about religion. But in terms of there being consciousness outside of our lived experience now, the evidence is, and by the way, there are literally millions of these cases, literally millions. It's pretty overwhelming.
Fascinating. Yeah. So, I'm thinking here, folks, as I'm talking to you, 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I would have called myself an atheist or maybe an agnostic. I never would have thought in a million years that I'd be having these conversations as a believer again. So this is pretty wild, because so many of these books that you've read, especially the Atheist, the Science, because I did the same thing. I followed a very similar journey as you and I were comparing notes about our stories. We followed very similar pattern of, feeling like we didn't know a lot, so we need to jump in and just educate ourselves. I find it very fascinating that you did the same thing that I did. So this is really resonating with me. I think this is a really, really cool conversation. So now you're thinking, well, okay, you got to start looking at other religions. And tell me what that journey was like.
Well, it was crazy because, of course, I had been brought up quite candidly, very honestly, in the LDS church, you're taught that all other religions are wrong, all creeds are an abomination, all other professors are corrupt. So that's not one, but three absolutes that everything out there is wrong. So I had a strong bias against Christianity, mainstream Christianity. That's what I'd been taught my whole life, that they were all corrupt. Now that's been backpedaled somewhat with, well, we take your truth and add to it. But in LDS scriptures, I think it's Joseph Smith, chapter 1, verse 19. He's quoting or presuming to quote God as saying they're all wrong and all abominations and all corrupt. So again, I had a strong bias against Christianity, but I have a buddy in particular in Las Vegas who's been on my back for decades to become a Christian. We would argue, just these, insanely ineffective arguments we've been having for years over Mormonism or Christianity. And I called him up and I said, hey, Mike, I am out of the Mormon church and I'm willing to listen to you. I'll be honest, I'm skeptical, but let's talk. But instead of me listening to everything you say while you're talking, I'm formulating my rebuttal, I'm willing to really listen to what you say. So he turned me on to C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, an atheist who became Christian. And C.S. Lewis, I think he comes from Cambridge. Oxford. So he's a brilliant guy. And then back to Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ. I've been through this book at least twice. Again, the Yale law guy who was trying to, get his wife out of Christianity as an atheist. This book, this recently came out. You can see I got it tabbed up pretty good. I went through this book pretty carefully. A Person of Interest by Warner Wallace. He's a UCLA guy. He's a homicide detective who uses abductive reasoning to piece together a case. And then Cold Case Christianity, also by Wallace. And then A Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. I really, quite honestly, haven't been through this book enough to talk about it very well. But I was really shocked, really genuinely shocked when I opened my head up to the idea of considering mainstream Christianity, the level of conversations. I felt like I spent my life in 6th grade and now I was in college level conversations, having really intelligent conversations. In fact, something I had never heard of before was the Veritas Forum, which started out of Harvard University. Veritas means truth in Latin. It started at Harvard. Now it's spread into Harvard, Yale, Stanford, University of Chicago, University of Texas, UCLA, where I did my grad school. It's everywhere but BYU. I think they'd be happy to go to BYU, but BYU is somewhat insular. I learned that as an undergrad student there. But these really intelligent debates and conversations where they literally invite atheists. I think it was Hitchens went in there and debated in the Veritas Forum, but they're good, civil, intelligent debates. And frankly, atheists make a lot of really good, intelligent points. I'm not discounting that. But the question is, okay, is it leaning this way or this way? Because we'll never know for certain on these unknowable questions. But that debate, that discussion, I've been missing out for decades. Now, I'm really into it. In fact, I just love it. I love that conversation at really high levels where everybody's invited to the group. I mean, imagine the president of BYU calling up RFM and John DeLynn and Bill Reel and Jonathan Streeter and Alan Mount and Lindsay Hansen Park and saying, hey, come, let's have a debate with all the BYU professors of the Quorum of the 12 in the Marriott Center and invite all the student body. That would never happen. But that's going on every day at Christian universities. Where Biola University, by where I grew up in Southern California, they literally once a year invite the atheists in to have a discussion in front of the student body. So those are conversations I can get behind because they're intellectually honest and both sides are represented.
Now, what about so let me ask you, so was Christianity the first religion you started investigating, or were you looking at other religions as well?
Yeah, that's a great question because I also was interested in Hinduism and Buddhism, Islam and Judaism. I flew to Egypt and Israel. I hired an Arab Israeli to take me around and show me the sites, and we had conversations for days on end. I flew to India, hired a Hindu guide who was very conversant on Buddhism. I already knew from my science background and stories I won't get into about meditation, which is actually a Buddhist practice, and the fact that Sarah Lazar out of Harvard has scientifically validated the healing aspects of meditation through brain scans. So that's an example where science is now catching up to what religion, particularly the Buddhists, have known for thousands of years in terms of how meditation can heal. So I was very interested in studying that more. I called up a client of mine who's Jewish, who's really into religion, and he's an attorney. We've had lunch on many occasions where he explains Judaism to me. As I explained on the onset, I had a bias towards Christianity, but I'm exploring all of these. And frankly, I guess the best way to put it is I learned something very positive and very helpful from every single one of them. From the Buddhists, from the Hindus, from the Jews, from Islam, they all have wonderful elements to it. And I think that the notion that, organized religion is destroying the world is just, a silly, construct. Of course, there are destructive religions, but just like science, there's good science and bad science. With religion, there's good science and good and bad religions.
So if you had to have a second choice for religion, if you decided Christianity wasn't for you, what would be the second runner-up, or the one that you might go back or go to?
I really like Buddhism, quite honestly. I like a lot of the meditative practices, but as I say, I admire aspects of all of them. I genuinely do.
Okay, well, I'll have to let my friend Nathan Smith know. He's a Buddhist,
Okay.
a former apologist for fair Mormon, and now a Buddhist, so post-Mormon Buddhist.
There you go.
So I've had many interesting conversations with him. So this is really great. And, so you explore all these other religions, you find value in all the different religions as well, which is interesting and actually makes sense that you would. So now you tell me where tell me where you want to go now. Where does your journey go now?
Well, I also found value in atheism because, I don't mean to be respectful to those who are active members of the Mormon Church, but their arguments were very interesting. They were all one God short of full atheism, and those types of arguments, if you're familiar with that whole narrative. But, quite honestly, I don't believe that God is a resurrected human on a planet near Kolob with lots of wives. I'm sorry, I mean no disrespect, but that does not resonate with me. But what does resonate with me is the God of Genesis, the God that Jesus actually believed in and referred to all the time, was a God that pre-existed time, space, and matter and created the Big Bang. So I learned, I kind of honed in on my concept of God with help from my atheist friends. So I learned from everyone, and I learned from agnostics because I'm largely agnostic. I am very open to questioning myself. I'm very open to entertaining questions that others might have. The thing I'm against is dogma, people that think they're right to the exclusion of everybody else, or people that call others names like lazy learners or delusional because you're faithful, or the name calling is a big red flag that you're dogmatic, and I don't really have time for that. But I have learned something positive from atheists, agnostics, deists, and theists.
Interesting. Yeah, I was just talking to somebody last night on a Zoom and told him that, agnostic needs to be the position you take in areas that you're not sure about, that you haven't studied, and then go about it that way. And just be open, to this. It's a better approach than dogmatism. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. And I have a number of atheist friends that would agree with that too, in terms of dogma. I also found a lot of value in Restoring Christ by Grant Palmer.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I had met him while he was alive. His book was just really well written, very common sense, to the point. And he landed on kind of a calmed down version of Christianity, which resonated with me. And then here's four scholars that out of BYU, that left the LDS Church and became Christian. So this was interesting because, of course, I had left the Mormon Church, and I was when you've been through the process, at least that I've been through, both these books kind of resonated and brought value, I think. And then I think the best books I came across that I don't have the adjectives for them, is Michael Gillian out of Harvard. This guy, he wrote a book called Believing is Seeing. He taught physics at Harvard University for years. And then he was on TV, I think on NBC. He was an atheist. And the more he got into the science at Harvard University as a physics professor, the more he saw compelling evidence that suggested a higher creative force can't not be explained as accidents of nature. His book it was brilliant. Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer. He's out of it's either Oxford or Cambridge. And he talks, I mean, this is an intense book, but he talks about the complexity of the DNA and the fact that DNA is storing information. It's like a jump drive on steroids, but it's the size of a single cell. You can't even see it with your naked eye, and yet it has more information packed in it than an entire set of encyclopedias, as we were talking about earlier. That's where I learned about this from this. I keep forgetting Cambridge scientist. And then probably my all-time favorite book in this whole, and I got lots of books I'm sparing you, not telling you about, is The Language of God by Francis Collins, PhD, MD out of Yale, who ran the $40 billion a year budgeted National Institutes of Health, was an atheist. He's the guy that President Clinton introduced with the Human Genome Project. I think it was in 2020. And probably the brightest scientist on the face of the earth today. And he talks about his journey from science and atheism to Christianity. Very, very intelligent, very bright. I just recommended this to Sam Young. He's read it. We have long, fascinating conversations about this particular book.
Interesting. Oh, wow. This is great. So, I want to know, like, let's give me a time frame here. So you left Mormonism how long ago?
Well, it's been 2000. It's been about 5 years.
Okay. And so would you say that and then over the course of how many years were you doing all this research?
I've been packing it. I put time into this every day since my whole world fell apart.
So essentially, this is an ongoing project you're doing.
Yeah.
That is fascinating to me. Wow. And so every day for the last 5 years, you've been, I tell people in my journey, I said, I read myself out of Christianity. And I find it interesting that you read yourself into Christianity. Interesting.
Yeah, but I wouldn't describe myself as necessarily a born-again Christian or even an evangelical Christian. I know you do, and I respect that. I'm more of a first century. My Christianity, well, we'll get to that in a minute, is very, very basic, essential driven. I'm not too worried or at all driven with non-essentials. And in Mormonism, a lot of I didn't know what essentials and non-essentials even were. I didn't know what the Jesus Creed was. There's so much I thought I knew all about Christianity. In fact, I knew all about everything because I knew my church was true. When I kind of got out of that mindset, I learned how much I didn't know and how much I didn't know about mainstream Christianity. So I subscribed to Christianity Today. I was shocked how open and it takes on hard issues and it calls out bad behavior within the Christian church itself. It's a very, whether you're Christian or not, it's a very respectable dialogue going on rather than just this perfectionism, everything's wonderful kind of worldview. And then another magazine I got was a biblical archaeology, where they're finding, evidence of there actually being a Pontius Pilate. Of course, there's actually a Jerusalem, and they're always finding these inscriptions and thing, and it's really interesting to see the amount of archaeology that's coming out by non-Christian archaeologists. Everybody's welcome to the party. I started getting into, Richard Rohr and Rob Bell and Eckhart Tolle,
Mhm.
and on my Mormon Stories thing, John labeled that as his thumbnail was I'm a progressive Christian. I'm really not a progressive Christian. I don't know what I am. I don't know if I landed on the right action, but that's kind of Eckhart Tolle Christianity. I would consider. I believe the resurrection's literal. I base that on some of these other books I've glossed over. And another thing, I'm really kind of a quasi fan of Bart Ehrman.
Yeah.
He's obviously a very bright guy, and there's a lot of misconceptions about Ehrman. He's not an atheist, he's agnostic. And it wasn't the biblical transcripts that drove him out of Christianity. It was the arguments over evil.
Yep.
And I've seen some evil because my career is studying disasters. So I've kind of come to terms on that. And then just to button it up real quick, Stephen, Bart Ehrman also wrote this trilogy of books on the Apostolic Fathers. And this is going back to the 3rd century and early writings of Christianity, because I wanted to see what Christians were saying before all kinds of man-made stuff was layered on top of it. And it looks very different than what some churches look like. And the Apocrypha, of course, which we don't learn about in the Mormon church, or at least I didn't. And the final book is my favorite. I lied when I said it was Francis Collins, but I never heard of this before as a Mormon, the D.K. This is a 1st century document. It's really more of a pamphlet, very brief. And this was kind of the church handbook. And it really hit me like a board over the head how simple Christianity is. It doesn't need, bookshelves of explanation. It's a very simple belief system that is a nice, healthy North Star. When we start layering on top of it, it starts going in weird ways. I worked on the Heaven's Gate cult, case, and I saw that weirdness, and they called themselves Christians. So Christianity, granted, can go in some bizarre twists and turns, but if you get back to the very basics, there's not a lot to really argue with.
Okay, that's fascinating. So you, in one sense, want to get back to 1st century Christianity.
In a sentence, yeah, that's where I kind of am right now in my 5-year journey. I just discovered this book a few weeks ago. In fact, I think I told you about it. Mm-hmm. And RFM is the one that told me about it. That's kind of where my head is right now.
Good. Excellent. So you had showed that big, huge thing of file folders. So what's in those folders?
Well, pick one, I'll tell you. It's like when I would read an article on the internet, or notes would come to me at 3 a.m.
Okay.
Here's contributions of Muslims to everyday lives. It's just all my notes and my obsession on each of these topics. It's kind of my passion project these days.
I'd love to see how your mind works. It's very fascinating.
No, you wouldn't.
Well, we got a glimpse there. That's
yeah. So, well, I do. In my career, I do jury exhibits. We take volumes of information and we translate them into exhibits to present to juries. And it's essential that they're, one, truthful, and they're accurate, they're logical, they're ethical, and that they're simple enough to be understood, that we're not trying to make things unnecessarily complicated. And so that's what I've been doing for years in business. So I'm kind of applying this now to my faith journey.
Okay. So, when last time I was out in Utah, of course, I was on Mormon Stories, and we were in between takes, and we were actually having lunch. I was at lunch with John DeLynn, and I commented to him. I said, you had that Alan Mount on, and you had Randy Bell on, and you had Kara, and you were there. And the one question that wasn't asked, that I thought was the most important question, especially if you're an atheist and you want to know about somebody's faith, is how is it? So explain to people, over the course of the last couple decades, you have been involved in just about every human-made natural disaster. You have seen the face of evil at the Pulse nightclub shooting, at Sandy Hook. You've stared evil right in the eyes. And the most obvious question that needs to be asked is, how in the world can you believe in God after, there are cops that walk into crime scenes as Christians and they walk out as atheists, man. So you tell me, how How do you believe in God?
Wow, well, that's a big question. I will first tell you, I'm going to tell you two stories that pop instantly in my mind, because I do have a high threshold for trauma. I did work on the World Trade Center. I worked on John Benet Ramsey. I worked on OJ Simpson. In fact, I host a podcast with Nicole Brown Simpson's sister, Tanya, called Post-Traumatic Thriving. So I have a pretty high threshold for trauma, but I have my limits, and I hit my limit on two cases. I hit them on more than that, but two I'll talk about. The Pulse nightclub, I walked in the door as a true believing Mormon. I'm ashamed to admit this, but I was in Laguna Beach, which is a very gay affirming, LGBT friendly community in Southern California. That's where I live. I was put in charge of the Mormon Church's Prop 8 campaign. And I was ambivalent about the topic, but in the Mormon Church, you're asked to do something and you do it without thinking about it too much, at least I did. And I walked in the door with my conditioned beliefs. I saw what I saw, and I can't talk about it very long or I will I'll become overwhelmed, but I walked out the door very LGBT affirming. I was so ashamed of myself that I had anything to do with that. I've apologized and will continue to apologize to my friends in the LGBT community. I'm a straight guy, but I was just wrong. That's not directly answering your question, but I think it's just necessary I share that experience because it's a cousin to what you asked. I will not join. I will visit churches. I will be friends with people that have points of view that are different than my own, but I will not join a church unless it's listed on gaychurch.org, which is, there's thousands of churches, Christian churches, that welcome our LGBT friends and family. And that's what Christianity really looks like to me. I cannot imagine a Jesus that would marginalize and shun a segment of society. That's not the Jesus I believe in. So thanks for letting me share that. But to where I have seen evil, this sounds like a movie or a made up story, but I was working on, it's just so bizarre, but I was working on the Bikini Atoll, where the Nuclear Claims Tribunal the US military had detonated nuclear bombs that blew up a mile-wide crater. It was the biggest atmospheric test of a nuclear weapon in the history of the world. And I was working on that case, and I represented people that lived on 4 islands that had radioactive fallout. And it really hit me because the guy who really spearheaded the case was a very quiet, gentle island man who lost his daughter to leukemia shortly after, or from radiation poisoning, I should say, shortly after the nuclear test. So there was a strong emotional feeling there. So I was flying to Chernobyl to study that case as part of the research I was doing. And I was looking at the world map, and I noticed Poland was very close by. So I asked my assistant to book that I would go by Auschwitz. And I didn't know much about Auschwitz other than what I think, we tend to learn in school, which isn't much. And I went there, and I was off season. There were no tourists there. And I went, there's actually 2 camps, a small camp and a large camp. I went in the small camp, and again, I got to be brief because it hits hard emotionally, but I saw the hanging gallows. I saw the walls where people stood when they were shot, and they built the prison so that the inmates incarcerated there had to watch the firing squads, knowing that their turn was coming. It was just evil. And anybody that tells me there's no such thing as evil or right or wrong, I just have to call BS. I've seen it. I saw it at the Pulse nightclub. I saw it here. And then I went to the big camp. I was the only person there. I went up in the guard tower. It was an industrialized complex of human abuse as far as the eye could see. And I came down, and I went down along the barracks and saw the inhumane toilet rooms that had it looked like hundreds of toilets, wooden toilet seats, men and women, no dignity. It was stripped from the people. And then as I followed down, I accidentally went and found myself in the gas chambers, and I was there by myself, standing in the gas chamber, and I thought, if a God existed, how could this happen? Because it was in such an industrialized scale, the killing and the abuse that was just sheer evil. And then I went out beyond the ovens. Is you go outside, there's a pond where they would dump the ashes very unceremoniously. And beyond that was a forest where people had to wait naked in the winter for their turn to go into the gas chamber, which was actually a relief. Their misery was so profound. And it was a very cold, crisp winter day. And I looked up in the sky, and it was a spiritual experience. It wasn't telling me which church to join or anything like that, but it was just an experience that said that as big as the evil is and was and will continue to be, God's love is bigger. And I got to admit, I did have a improper thought that I hope there's a hell, because I want Hitler to go there and some other folks. But that thought went away, because the thought that came to my mind wasn't punishment. That was my thought. The thought was, if there's no God, these guys, these war criminals, these butchers, Stalin and Chairman Mao, which I might point out were atheists, they'll get away with it. That will be the end of the story. And a hope in God, a belief in God, a faith in God gives hope for a reconciliation. I didn't say punishment, I said a reconciliation. So I have seen, according to the BBC and NBC and CBS and everybody else, I've seen more disasters on planet Earth than anybody. And I can't argue, but I do believe in God, because I believe that love trumps hate. And with every disaster I've seen, as much evil as I've seen, I've always seen more love and good, kind-hearted people come out of the woodwork that will give their shirt off their back. They don't have much money, they don't have much food, they don't have much in the way of resources, but whatever they got, they'll give. And it's not just the Christians, it's the atheists. When I volunteer in San Quentin prison, I'm sitting next to an atheist guy and an atheist woman on the other side. They're as gracious and kind, or kinder than I am. Christianity resonates with me. But I acknowledge that good and light and truth comes from all kinds of sources. And I do hope for a God. And I think the scientific evidence is there for a God, because that means there will be an ultimate reconciliation of an awful lot of good and bad and evil.
Thank you so much, Randy. I really appreciate you sharing those words with my audience. And I think that that's just a very compelling story you told. I understand, I even, when I was on Mormon Stories, I said, listen, I acknowledge the problem of evil. And for those of you who are atheists because of it, I understand and I get it. And I'm not there to try to convince you. I'm just trying to tell you that there's also other ways of looking at it. And I think Randy's is another story, because I don't know if I would be, I don't know if I would believe in God after what you've seen, but I'm just blown away by it. And I think it's just a fantastic testimony, if you will, that you have. And I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing it with us.
Well, thank you, Stephen. We've had the chance to visit and become friends. And I think we think in large part in similar ways. And I think what you're doing, I think is just wonderful, because there has been a lot of animosity between Mormons and evangelicals. I love Mormons. I have family and friends that are Mormon. I have family and friends that are evangelical. I have family and friends in all the camps. And the people I want to have over to my barbecue will all get along with each other and respect each other and be kind to each other.
Amen. So just to wrap this thing up, man, first of all, thank you for giving us the tour of these great books on Mormon Book Reviews. And I just want to know, is there any final words you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, thanks for the chance. I mentioned the podcast, Post-Traumatic Thriving. It's I really believe through what I've seen with trauma and disasters that the biggest problem facing humanity is not drugs and alcohol or workaholism or violent crimes or incarceration. Those are all symptoms of the problem. The problem is unresolved trauma, particularly childhood trauma. So Tanya and I are taking that on. We have had some fantastic guests. In the first episode, I had Tanya on one side of the table. I interviewed her about the OJ Simpson case, and I had a friend of mine who's Black who was incarcerated for 22 years for murder, a murder he didn't commit, but he was convicted because he was part of a robbery where a murder was committed when he was actually back home. And I asked Tanya, what was your childhood like? And she was playing on the beach with her sisters in their bikinis on Monarch Beach. And my friend JC, who, by the way, was the first person to ever be incarcerated and give a TED Talk while incarcerated, he was talking about eating out of trash cans as a kid and being homeless and watching his aunt die from a drug overdose in front of him, and just a horrific childhood growing up in Oakland. And today, JC's earning a PhD. I just attended his graduation from college. And so people can move beyond their traumas. And so since I have access to media, I have access to a lot of wonderful friends and interesting people. We put this podcast together, and I'm pretty excited about it. So I appreciate you letting me share that.
That's awesome, dude. Hey, everybody, wasn't this great? I'm so glad Dr. Randy Bell came on the program. I watched your interviews on Mormon Stories. Shortly after you did those interviews, you and I were talking with each other. I think John got us in touch with each other. I think you and I and others, there's other people, other Christians that maybe look at things a little bit differently, think outside of the box, and want to have a real constructive dialogue with the Restoration and with people who have since transitioned out of Mormonism. And so I think that we are another voice that they can listen to and at least consider what we are bringing to the table, if you will. And so I think we're going to be partners in crime for a very long time.
I hope so. And I want to express love to my Mormon friends. You know, I'm saying what's right for me. Yep. I'm not saying it's right for you. And I no longer, that's all I can do. I just live my life the way I think has integrity. I hope I haven't said anything that's been offensive, and if I have, I apologize. But, you know, whoever you are, where you ever come for, Jesus talked about love, and that's where I'm trying to come from.
It's all about love. Love it, dude. So folks, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to remind my audience, don't forget, we have a Patreon page, as well as I just got a PayPal set up for those of you who like to make contributions to the channel. Just a reminder to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification button for when a new episode comes out. Also, mormonbookreviews@gmail.com if you need to get a hold of me. We are now on, I think, 5 major podcast platforms. We are, of course, on Apple, Spotify, Google. Now we're on Audible and Amazon Music. 7,000 downloads in the last 30 days, folks. So that's starting to pick up too. So thank you all again. Thanks for coming on. Everybody be blessed and be well.